All right, welcome back. So today we're going to dive into the knowledge assistant that we talked about last time. If you haven't seen the legacy code documentation video, I'd suggest looking at that first and then coming back to this one, because then this will make much more sense. For this one, let me start with a story. When we talk about the banking space, there are a ton of legacy systems and there is a lot of complexity in the code. These are typically written in COBOL and other old languages, and they're poorly understood and documented. They've been running for 40 years, and the documentation on these systems are everywhere. Now, a lot of financial institutions have a few different challenges coming up here in the next 18 to 24 months. The first is that there is a retirement risk. So a lot of the folks who maintain and run and program these things are retiring in the next year or two. So we've seen a ton of folks who've wanted to go and document what's going on in the code, not necessarily to replace it, but to just really understand what's going on there and then be able to work with the code in a variety of different ways. So that's what this knowledge assistant enables you to do once you've built the context lakehouse. Let's dive into what the knowledge assistant looks like. So, simple chatbot, very straightforward structure. What we've done is use the AI to go out, pull in all the legacy code, ingest it, as well as get all of the documentation that exists pulled together. So now we have the ability to do all kinds of interesting things. And let me show you what some of those might be. We might have a simple question that we want to ask. Hey, what does PCD 2501 do? And how does it tie into our daily accrual jobs? Which, if you're a new developer in this space, you might ask. And the AI will think about it for a little while, and it's got all of this documentation interrelated. And it's able to give you a pretty solid answer the same way as shoulder tapping an experienced developer in your space would be able to do. Now you may want to ask it more in-depth questions about what's going on in this PCD. And so we might say, what logs will show if this ran correctly? And we'll get the answer back from everything that it understands in the code, as well as if it has any knowledge, for example, of content in the legacy knowledge management system. So then I could go even further in depth and ask it, how about if we are to look at some of these other interrelated things that you told me about and try to understand what those do? So again, simple back and forth with a subject matter expert. Normally you're emailing or you're calling, in this case, or maybe a Slack channel. In this case, you're getting back instantaneous responses. At least it's a good starting point. Another type of question that we get a lot in the banking space is from the regulators. So there's an entire category of questions that you can now ask the Context Lakehouse around produce reports that do certain things. And so we might want to ask a question, something like the IRS wants to know how we calculate the withholding logic, and what we might want to do is to generate a report on that. And so the AI will go through and generate this report. And again, this is the first version. I wouldn't send this directly off to the IRS. And so instead of taking 2 or 3 weeks and lots of people's time, it might take a few days for an SME to look through this, validate it, and get it in a shape that it can actually be sent to the regulator. Let's say I'm a new person and I need to learn about how to log in, how to access things, how to change things. What I might do is I might just sit down and do some Q&A. You know, I'm new here. How can I learn about this? How can I learn about that? And the AI will come back with a 101, 201, 301 tutorial where it can walk me through how to get familiar with the system. The other types of questions that you might run into is, let's say we're actually doing maintenance on the tech. And we need to understand, okay, if we're going to make some changes to XYZ application, what are the downstream and upstream issues that we might run into? And again, it will sit down and think through what the different components are, what the upstream and downstream impacts are, and be able to give you a very nice outline of exactly what it is that you're likely to run into if you're doing maintenance on this very specific PCD that we've been talking about. The other types of things that we saw in the last demo that you can also do when you're actually doing these maintenance types of requirements. Let's say, okay, I understand what the changes look like. Now I want to actually toggle off the daily interest rates. And let's see if we can come up with some requirements for that. Okay. So it was unable to come up with that request. So let's try that. Maybe try that again. Okay. So something went wrong in the LLM as it was thinking through. Maybe it got back something that didn't quite make sense. So again, now we've put in the exact same question, and now we've got a formal requirements document in whatever format we deem to be a good formal requirements document, and it will come back and produce that for us. The other kinds of things then we can now ask it is, okay, let's say that I do make those changes, right? If I do make those changes, what are likely the test cases that I need to put together? And here we have a whole detail around what are the test cases, what are the scenarios, what are the expected outcomes. And then finally, the other types of things that we can do when we look at the capabilities of the context lakehouse is we know, the AI knows how all of these tens of millions of lines of code work. And so now we can actually ask it questions about chunks of code. As we're working on a piece of code, we can ask it questions about, hey, what does this piece of code do? So I could literally go in, let me actually pull up some COBOL code that is part of this system. And you don't need to watch me doing that. Let me ask it to look at this COBOL snippet. And then I will copy paste it in here. And for those of you who know COBOL, you'll recognize this as a component in a banking system, but you'll see it's just standard COBOL code. And we will have it think through what that code is doing. Okay, so it's still going. So what you'll see here is it's gone through the code, and it's gone through and said, here are the different components in the code. And now it's also showing you those components broken out and a description at the line level of what that code is doing. And I can also go in here, and as I'm highlighting, I can look at it in the context of the code and understand what's going on. So very, very powerful tool for a new developer who doesn't really know a lot about what's going on, understands COBOL potentially, but doesn't really know what's going on. They can put a code snippet in and get all of the knowledge that is in that context lakehouse about that chunk of code. So let's pause there, and we will continue in another video, and we'll dive into the QA side of it next.